The lights were on. The crowd was already screaming. And then something went wrong. This wasn't the end of a show. This was the very first song. Tens of thousands of people had waited hours in Buenos Aires, packed shoulder to shoulder, expecting what Guns N' Roses had been delivering for years: long sets, tight performances, controlled chaos that somehow worked. No one was bracing for drama anymore. That era felt buried. But within moments of the band hitting the stage, you could see it on Axl Rose's face. Something was off. Not subtle, not hidden. His movements were sharper. His expression tightened. The kind of look that says the problem isn't small, and it's not going away. Then it happened. Axl ripped the microphone from its stand and hurled it straight into the drum kit. Not a toss, not frustration slipping out. A full, violent throw. The sound cut. The crowd froze. And before anyone could process what they'd just seen, he stormed across the stage and kicked the bass drum like it had personally betrayed him. This wasn't performance art. This wasn't part of the show. It was a breakdown happening in real time, in front of one of the biggest crowds on the tour. And the shock wasn't just what he did, it was when he did it. First song. No warning. No explanation. For fans who believed the chaos was gone forever, this moment felt like watching a ghost step back into the room. And once you see that ghost, you can't pretend it isn't there. But that was only the surface. Because the real tension wasn't just about Axl losing his temper. It was about who was standing behind the drum kit when it happened. For nearly a decade, Guns N' Roses had done the impossible. They'd turned unpredictability into discipline. 3-hour shows, consistent performances, Axl showing up on time, night after night. For many fans, it felt like proof that the band had finally outrun its past. The meltdowns were history. The walk-offs were legend. The chaos belonged to another lifetime. That's why this moment landed so hard. This wasn't the Axl people had been watching lately. This was the version fans thought they'd never see again. The one who didn't negotiate with problems, didn't pause to explain, didn't soften the impact. The one who let frustration explode outward, no matter who was standing nearby. And the crowd felt it immediately. You could hear the reaction shift. Cheers turned uneven. Confusion replaced excitement. People weren't sure whether to scream, boo, or stay silent. Some clapped nervously, thinking it was a dramatic pause. Others stared at the stage, waiting for the band to come back and reset the moment. But the reset never came. When Axl walked off, he didn't look back. No shrug, no gesture, just gone. And in that silence, something old resurfaced, a feeling longtime fans remembered too well. That uneasy thought. Is this really happening again? Because when a band spends years rebuilding trust, it only takes seconds to remind people why that trust was fragile in the first place. And this time, the damage wasn't just about the outburst itself. It was about who might be taking the blame. Behind the drum kit that night wasn't a longtime bandmate. It wasn't someone who'd survived decades of internal chaos. It was Isaac Carpenter, the newest drummer, to step into one of the most demanding roles in rock music. Imagine that position. You've just joined Guns N' Roses. You're still learning the rhythm of the band, the personalities, the unspoken rules. And suddenly, on one of the biggest stages of the tour, the frontman loses control publicly, violently, in the middle of the very first song. Even if the anger wasn't aimed at him directly, it didn't matter. The optics were brutal. A mic thrown into the drum kit, a kick to the bass drum, a storm-off that left the entire stage in chaos. To the crowd, it looked personal. And that's where the speculation ignited. Was this about sound issues in Axl's monitors? Was something off in the drums? Or was this a message loud, public, and impossible to ignore, aimed at the newest member of the band? No one on stage said a word. And when the person behind the kit is new, silence becomes dangerous. Because without context, fans fill in the gaps themselves. Some defended Axl instantly. Others felt the anger crossed a line. And many couldn't stop thinking about how exposed that moment made the drummer look. What should have been a debut tour became a pressure cooker. One mistake, real or imagined, suddenly felt amplified in front of the entire world. And the worst part? This wasn't the end of the night. Because when Axl finally came back, things didn't calm down. They escalated. Once the band returned to the stage, people expected some kind of reset, a quick explanation, a joke, anything to release the tension hanging in the air. Instead, the uncertainty only deepened. Almost immediately, theories started spreading through the crowd. Some fans pointed to the most familiar excuse in live music: sound problems, bad monitors, a mix that wasn't right, a singer unable to hear himself properly. It wouldn't have been unheard of, especially in massive outdoor shows. But the way Axl reacted didn't feel technical. If this were just a monitor issue, why throw the microphone at the drum kit? Why walk straight to the drums and kick the bass drum? Why storm off without saying a word? Those details mattered. They made the moment feel targeted, even if it wasn't meant to be. From the crowd's perspective, it looked less like frustration with equipment and more like anger spilling over toward the stage itself. And then there was the timing. This happened during the first song, not after hours of exhaustion, not at the end of a long night, right at the beginning when adrenaline should have been high and patience still intact. That alone made people question the technical issue explanation. Fans began arguing among themselves. Some defended Axl instantly, saying he's always demanded perfection. Others felt something deeper was at play, tension that had been building long before that night. Because sound problems don't usually explode like that. They irritate, they frustrate. They don't cause someone to lose control in front of thousands of people. And that's when people started to realize this might not be about sound at all. It might be about pressure. Eventually, Axl did speak, but not in the way anyone expected. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what the crowd had just witnessed. He simply said something along the lines of, "I'll just try and wing this." And that was it. For some fans, those words landed harder than the outburst itself, not because they were aggressive, but because they were dismissive. They suggested improvisation instead of accountability, effort instead of clarity. In moments like this, silence becomes its own statement. The crowd didn't need a long speech. They didn't even need blame assigned. They just needed recognition, confirmation that what they saw mattered, that their reaction wasn't being ignored. But instead, the show moved on as if nothing had happened. And that disconnect widened the gap instantly. People weren't just reacting to what Axl did. They were reacting to what he didn't do afterward. The lack of context allowed frustration to grow unchecked. Every pause felt heavier. Every glance toward the drum kit felt loaded. Some fans tried to let it go. They focused on the music, telling themselves the rest of the night would smooth things out. Others couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had cracked. Because when tension is left unspoken, it doesn't disappear. It mutates. And that tension was now baked into every note that followed. Guns N' Roses fans are not strangers to chaos. Longtime followers had lived through delayed shows, canceled performances, and legendary walk-offs. In another era, this might have been shrugged off as classic Axl. But this wasn't another era. This was supposed to be the stable chapter. For years, fans had defended the band by pointing to growth, to consistency, to professionalism. This tour, this lineup, this version of Guns N' Roses felt like proof that the past had finally stayed where it belonged. That's why this moment felt different. It wasn't just an explosion, it was a contradiction. A reminder that the old patterns weren't as buried as people hoped. And when something you believe is resolved suddenly reappears, it shakes more than just the moment, it shakes trust. What unsettled fans most wasn't the anger itself, it was how familiar it felt, the body language, the refusal to explain, the storm-off that left everyone guessing. For newer fans, it was shocking. For older fans, it was unsettling in a different way. They'd seen this movie before, and they remembered how it usually ended. That's why the reaction in Buenos Aires lingered. It wasn't outrage alone, it was disappointment mixed with recognition. The kind that makes you quietly ask yourself whether things ever really changed, or if they were just paused. And as the night went on, that question refused to leave the room. Because one outburst is an incident. But patterns make people nervous. What made people uneasy that night wasn't just what happened on stage, it was what it reminded them of. For longtime fans, Axl's reaction didn't feel new. It felt familiar in a way that made their stomachs tighten. Over the years, his onstage blow-ups had become part of rock folklore. Mic throws, walk-offs, sudden endings. Moments that once felt rebellious and unpredictable had slowly turned into cautionary memories. But time changes how people see things. What once looked like raw passion now carried a different weight. Fans weren't younger anymore, neither was the band. Expectations had shifted. Chaos no longer felt romantic, it felt unnecessary. That's why this incident reopened old conversations that had been quiet for years, not shouted, not dramatic, just quietly resurfacing. People started asking questions they thought they'd already answered a long time ago. Had Axl really moved past this behavior? Or had it just been dormant, waiting for the right trigger? Because patterns don't vanish on their own. They wait. And when pressure builds new members, massive tours, impossible expectations, those patterns don't need much encouragement to resurface. This moment didn't create doubt. It confirmed it. And once confirmation sets in, fans stop making excuses. They start paying attention. To understand why this happened now, you have to look beyond the stage. Guns N' Roses aren't just a band touring clubs. They're a global machine. Stadiums, international crowds, different countries, different crews, different technical setups every single night. One small issue can feel enormous when everything is already stretched thin. Add a new drummer into that environment and the pressure multiplies. Every note matters. Every cue matters. Every second is being judged not just by fans, but by bandmates who've lived inside this machine for decades. There's no learning curve on a stage that big. You're expected to arrive perfect. And for Axl, perfection has never been optional. He doesn't just perform songs, he controls them, the pacing, the feel, the energy. When something doesn't line up, it doesn't register as a minor inconvenience. It feels like the whole structure is slipping. That's when frustration turns physical. Not planned, not strategic, just immediate reaction. The problem is, reactions like that don't stay contained. They spill outward. They affect the people around you. They become moments that live online forever, stripped of context, replayed without nuance. What might have started as internal pressure suddenly became a public spectacle. And once the world is watching, there's no way to pull it back. By the time the show moved forward, the damage wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet. Fans still watched. They still listened. But something had shifted beneath the surface. The excitement had been replaced with analysis. Every move was scrutinized. Every pause felt loaded. And that's when the uncomfortable question crept in. Not shouted. Not typed in all caps. Just whispered between strangers in the crowd. What if this isn't a one-off? Because the fear wasn't about another outburst. It was about the return of uncertainty. The feeling that any night could suddenly collapse without warning. That trust once rebuilt could disappear again just as fast. Some fans defended Axl, pointing to decades of pressure no one else could understand. Others sympathized with the band and crew caught in the crossfire. And some simply felt tired of having to explain away moments that shouldn't need explaining anymore. That division is what lingered. Not anger. Not outrage. Division. When fans stop reacting together, when they stop sharing the same emotional space, something fundamental changes. The relationship becomes fragile, conditional. And once that happens, every incident carries more weight than it should. Because it's no longer just about the music. It's about whether people still believe in the version of the band they're watching. What made this moment linger wasn't the mic throw. It wasn't the kick. It wasn't even the walk-off. It was the realization that legends aren't untouchable anymore. For a long time, Guns N' Roses lived in a space where flaws were part of the mythology. Chaos felt like character. Unpredictability felt exciting. Fans didn't just accept it, they expected it. It was baked into the experience. But something changes when a band survives long enough. The audience grows with them. The chaos stops feeling romantic. And moments that once passed as rock and roll start to feel heavier, more complicated, harder to defend. That's where this incident landed. Not as a scandal, not as a meltdown, but as a reminder. A reminder that even the biggest bands in the world are still made of people under pressure. People who carry old habits, old reactions, old scars, even after years of stability. And fans felt that. They didn't erupt in outrage. They didn't turn their backs overnight. They simply recalibrated. Expectations shifted. Trust became cautious instead of automatic. That's the quiet consequence nobody talks about. When a moment doesn't destroy a legacy, but it slightly changes how people hold it. And once that shift happens, it doesn't fully reverse. Long after the tour moves on, moments like this don't disappear. They resurface in conversations, in comment sections, in memories fans carry when they buy tickets again. Not as anger, but as awareness. People remember how quickly a perfect night can crack, how silence can feel louder than music, how a single reaction can travel further than an entire set list. And that's why this clip keeps getting replayed. Not because it's shocking, not because it's dramatic, but because it feels human in an uncomfortable way. It forces fans to sit with a question they'd rather avoid. How much unpredictability are we still willing to accept from the artists we love? Because admiration doesn't vanish in moments like this. It changes shape. It becomes more careful, more conditional, less forgiving. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's just part of growing up for the band and for the people watching them from the crowd. So when you see that footage, again, the mic flying, the tension hanging in the air, it's worth asking yourself, was this just frustration boiling over for a second? Or a reminder that some ghosts never fully leave the stage? That question doesn't have an answer. And maybe that's why it stays with you long after the music fades. Moments like this don't come with answers. They leave questions. So I want to know what you felt watching this. Was this just one bad moment under pressure? Or the kind of reaction that changes how you see a band forever? There's no right answer, but your take belongs in the comments. Old school rock chaos or disrespect to the fans? What do you think?